changes to the agenda before we proceed?
There is not.
Okay. And that'll move us on to item 2, continuing the edit review of the draft of the September 2020. By my notes was that we were at, grab my printed copy here. We were on page 51. We were looking at, I think, parking and loading standards.
Yes.
We got to the end of a section. And I think Chris had said that he was ready, or like basically good to that point.
Yeah, actually, what I was saying, I don't believe I have any other items to
that was
comment
my recollection
on.
As well.
Yeah, for the rest of the document. Well, we have the uses in part A.
Exactly. We'll get into the uses in a minute.
If we can go over the suggested changes that for the administrative and application process. I had sent quite a while ago some proposed changes that we haven't gotten to yet. Just a few that line it up with what we discussed at our meeting when we first made changes to this document. It basically is taking away the administrative review discussion and the site plan review. And we can go through those one at a time and just make sure you're all on board. I think they're minor changes, but we need to go through them really quickly.
Sure. I have a document that's dated September 15th, 2020, and it's got some red lines from you, Darcy, on page 7 of, there's actually only 4 pages. So it's page 3 of the document, or 3 of the section. And then there was there's a strikeout on the bottom of the second page, which is page number 6. But for the most part, it's clean. Is that the document you're talking about?
That's correct.
Does everybody have a copy of that either in front of them, or could it be shared so that we can all see it?
Yeah, I don't think I have that.
I'll bring it up.
Tell me again what it's
the date is September 15th, 2020. The document is called Part 2.
Okay, I have Shaping the Avenue from September 2020 and a date of September 15th. And of course it has Part 2 in it, but what I don't see is any redlining that you mentioned.
Yeah, let me see how they line up.
Hang on one sec.
Yep. So you've got the I'll say the clean version of that document, Chris.
Okay.
The one that Darcy has marked up and with which, and again, if you can share it, that probably would be the best way to
I'll do
proceed.
that.
But it starts with page 6. Page. I guess it's 5, isn't it? Page 5, and it's only a 4-page document, but it's those 4 pages of what constitutes Part 2.
Okay.
Administration and application. So I think you're probably good. It's starting with the clean copy, particularly if we can share the redlined copy.
Right. I should tell you, based on this document, which I went through, the non-redlined but presumably current one, I have a full page of items to talk about in this one Part 2.
And I think you had mentioned that.
I hope a lot of them will be quick, but
that's fine. I think we actually had gone through, or had bypassed this because you had some comments last time, and there were some changes that were going to be made. Or it was actually, I think, 2 meetings ago.
Right.
Let's start with the red lines, and then we'll pick up on your comments, Chris.
Yes. I'm not finding them readily, so if I can just talk through them.
They are pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the first one I have is on page 6, B1. We're removing the administrative discussion from the site plan review since we're not differentiating in the table. So you would just capitalize P for site plan and remove and administrative.
okay, wait just a minute. I'm lost here.
Okay. On 202 plan review.
Okay,
B1.
202.
Yep.
B1. Okay, got it.
So remove and administrative reviews. So it just says site plan reviews and approvals. Capitalize the P and remove and administrative.
Okay.
Because we're
Although-
talking about the type of review and then the type of reviewer, and we don't want to use that in the same sentence because we've changed that on the table to show the types of site plan, special use permit, and rezoning, and then the reviewers are across the table. So it's not really a site plan and administrative review. It's just site plan review and approvals.
You're saying table 202,
Correct.
but it has a column called administrative review.
Right, but we don't talk about planning commission review and city council review. You know what right now
Okay.
we're just talking about review and approval process.
Okay, makes sense.
And then under that same 202B5, remove planning commission retains the option to refer an application to city council for action.
And that's being removed because that action is actually picked up in the table and you don't want to have it duplicated. You don't want to have it in
Right.
two places. Okay.
And then number 6, under that same category, remove that entire number 6. That basically is being removed because we discussed at that meeting that even if it's an administrative review, we want them to be required to have the same information provided that we would have for our regular site plan review so that it can be reviewed with all the information necessary.
So does that strike everybody as appropriate?
So that's all of it?
Go ahead, Darcy.
Yeah, no, I've got a couple more.
There's a couple of ads. Yep.
And then after that, we don't talk about special use permit and rezoning under this category. And I think that was just an oversight. And we probably should reorganize them and add special numbers under C. Because I missed there's A, B, and then it goes to D right now.
Sure.
So under C, we would put special use permit, and then special use permit shall comply with Article 2, Division 3 of Chapter 50 to make sure that that's clear. And number D would be rezoning, and it would do the same. Rezoning shall comply with Article 2, Division 1 of Chapter 50. And then incentives requiring city council approval would be changed to E, and modifications require planning commission approval would change to F.
So the new C and D would appear before the table then?
Yes.
That's the document that's that part 2 document that I'd referenced earlier. That's got, I think, unless there's something on the next page, that picks up all the red lines that were part of that revision.
And that's it on that.
Yep. right, any questions or concerns about those before we move on to before we move into Commissioner Wolf's issues? All right, Chris, I think that we're good with those. If you want to, we scroll back a couple of pages.
Yeah. Does anyone else? Am I the only one who has suggestions in part
I
two?
think so.
All right.
I've got a note of clarification for myself, but that's the only. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Tell me what you think about this possible change. On 201B and also the heading for table 201, I'm not crazy about the word applicability, and I think it would make the purpose of this section clearer if B were changed to say modifications to non-conforming structures. And I was thinking about the fact if I were looking at the code and knew that I wanted to alter a non-conforming structure, it would make it easier for me to find this section and recognize it if it said modifications to instead of applicability. And then the same, the same change in the heading.
Sure.
Does that make sense or?
Fine. Yep.
Good change.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, and then similarly in 201B, I would change the sentence there, the one that precedes the table. After the word for, I would add modifications to. So it would say for modifications to non-conforming structures located in the Avenue Form District. And then I would suggest removing the comma delimited phrase as designated on the zoning map, because I can't figure out what that means or how it adds anything to the sentence there. Isn't it just enough to say located in the Avenue Form District?
I agree.
Or and then if you're caught up, I have one more change to that sentence.
Please.
It would continue to say, as it does, compliance with each component of this district shall, and I would say be required based on the table below. The phrase right now says compliance with each component of this district shall apply based on the table. To me, it makes more sense to say compliance shall be required.
That's good.
That
How about just is required?
It's good also.
yeah, I thought earlier we had been told that it was better to say shall when we wanted to
True.
state it strongly. That's why I did that. But it
No,
is,
either way, it's just, I don't like that, future tense stuff all the time is kind of clunky, but
yeah, that's why I didn't used to do it. But some of our other discussions led toward using shall, and it is okay with me. But compliance with each component of this district is required based on the table below.
Dave, do you want to weigh in on this?
I think throughout our ordinances we use shall a lot, and just for consistency's sake, I would say use shall.
but do you say shall be required? That's very clunky. It's like if you said shall apply, it's better than shall be required. It's just linguistically kind of clunky.
But I think is works also. I'm okay with it either way.
Let's do is required then.
Okay. Now this is a trickier one. This is referring to back to what this table used to look like. Just a minute. I don't know if you have an old copy, but
I do actually. I have the October one that I can bring up.
October of what, last year? Or
2018. Or do you want something sooner? I can probably bring something sooner.
All right, let me see if I can explain it. In the table, the first major heading says expansion of building floor area. And then there are 5 rows below that. Prior to this version, there was another major heading between the 3rd and 4th rows that said changes in use. And I think we need that back again, because the first 3 rows are indeed about expansion of building floor area, but the 4th and 5th are about changes in use, not about expansion of the building.
Do you want me to share that previous one?
Sure.
I have one. Do you have one, Dave?
I've got one.
Here,
I've
Dave.
got a copy of it, January 31st of this year. And it's got the row that Chris is talking about.
I have one also.
Okay.
So we're going to restore that, or? Okay.
So add that back in.
No, well, it would be right above, does not require a building addition. It would be between the 3rd and 4th rows of that table.
Oh, just the title. I see what you're saying.
Right, because the 4th and 5th rows are about changes in use.
Got it.
Okay, then looking at the 4th row that now follows that heading, I find that confusing the way that's written, and I think it should say, the word less should be more, I believe. It depends on how you read it, but it should say, does not require a building addition or more than 10% additional parking area.
You're right.
Got it.
Okay. All right, now this is one of the more complicated ones. The really lengthy row above that, one with all the text in it that starts with 1- and 2-story buildings. That's in there because we were trying to replicate the rule, which is currently in the B3, where we now have a minimum height of 4 stories in our current B3, and we were trying to allow them to increase a 1-story building to 2, let's say, without necessarily increasing it all the way to 4. Does everybody follow that, or
Correct,
why
yep.
we did that? Yeah. And I think it would be better written. I'm trying to remember exactly. Less than 4 stories. Right now, it doesn't even say that it's really talking about adding stories to it, if you read through that carefully. Anyway, let me tell you what I think we might want it to say. First of all, I think we might want to say in M4 frontage, because that would make it close to the current B3. As it's written right now, it would apply anywhere in the Avenue Form District. I'm not sure we really want that. But so then I would say in M4 frontage, I'll read the entire thing here. Addition of stories to existing 1- and 2-story buildings up to a total of no more than 3 stories if the existing building remains substantially the same and no additional structural changes are needed to the existing building to support the additional stories. So a lot of that is copied from the text that's there already. So first of all, it specifies in M4 frontage only, and then it immediately says addition of stories to existing 1- and 2-story buildings. So you can immediately tell exactly the situation it's talking about, which you can't tell from the one that's there right now.
So you're talking about the third one down, the change.
That's right.
Okay. So I'm sorry, can you read that again? In M4.
In M4 frontage, addition, do you want me to read it so you can, slowly enough you can write it?
Yes, so I can write it down, thanks.
Yeah. Addition of stories to existing 1- and 2-story buildings
Very good.
up to a total of no more than 3 stories
Okay.
and then it virtually copies what's in there. I guess I'll read it to you anyway. Or if the existing building remains substantially the same,
Okay.
and no additional structural changes are needed,
Okay.
to the existing building
Okay.
to support the additional stories. That's the end.
Great.
And
So
that's,
just replace what's there with this.
yeah, if you agree that it says what we're trying to do there.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
The part that says, and no additional structural changes are needed to the existing building to support the additional height. Is that, why do we care about whether they have to structurally alter the building? I mean, if we hold true to it and there's no substantial changes to the building, in effect, it doesn't really change how it looks. Why do we care what structural changes are made to it?
I had presumed that was part of the existing
That's existing language.
language.
Right. I think I can explain the thinking behind it. It's that, and yes, it did come from the language in the B3 requirement, that if they're going to do something that requires a stronger foundation or some other major work on the existing building, then we want them to go up to 4 stories. We want them to meet the minimum height if they're going to put that much into it. This is intended to allow them to do more lightweight or less extensive changes to add 1 or 2 stories. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can't imagine any circumstance where they aren't going to have to change the structure below it to allow for an additional height.
We
Yeah,
have
there's
that circumstance in a building that was downtown to begin with. They didn't have to change the footing for center or city center. They used the existing foundation.
Wow. Yeah, it wouldn't be entirely unheard of to pre-plan for that as an eventuality. And that, the fact that they're not necessarily significantly oversized, but that sort of concrete and steel can hold up an awful lot that you might not think.
Especially
That was the only, I had presumed all along that was the case, because I was thinking, if it is say a 1-story building and it's only sized, the foundation and so on is only sized to hold up what's there now. Any change that you're going to make to hold anything above it, you might just as well take the next step and press it up to the next to the hoped for height.
all right.
Yep. I tidied that up.
So now, the other 2 rows, the 2 rows above that, now let's look at those. So they specifically apply only if an additional foundation is required. If someone wants to expand a building and no additional foundation is required, it appears that no part of the project, not even new construction, would have to comply with the code at all. That there's nothing in this table that would cover that situation.
If it's new construction, it would be required to, this is only talking about modifications to non-conforming structures.
Yes.
So doesn't that eliminate a new construction building from this portion of the code, correct?
Yes, I'm not talking about a totally new building, no.
I see. But the new portion of the building.
Yes.
I'm reading this as something that's built on top of what's existing.
Exactly.
We're not talking about an expansion of the footprint, but we are talking about additional floor area.
Well, first of all, we are talking about expansion of the footprint potentially here. If you wanted to expand the footprint of a building by 25%, let's say, and put in a new foundation to support that,
Yes, hopefully.
then that would be covered under the second row,
Correct.
right?
Right.
But if you were adding a second story, say, to something outside of the downtown,
Right.
it appears that nothing would apply in this table.
That's how I read it as well.
Think
And
so.
what is that? I don't think that's really what we want, is it?
So I'm thinking that just thinking out loud here is that if the intention of the sort of, well, it's actually really more for the larger of the two, the major expansions, is that would start to hold that street line and create that public space that's desired, so that any expansion, any major expansion would start to hold to the required building line. But that's something that were built, say, on top of an existing 2 or 3 story building, presuming it could hold the, hold that, had sufficient capacity to hold the extra construction, as written here, wouldn't require, say, establishing that required building line, pushing out toward the street, so to speak. So you're saying that, if someone's going to make a major expansion, that building higher is not permitted, shouldn't be permitted, that in fact that major expansion should actually seek to sort of meet all of the particularly placement comes into mind, should seek to meet that particular standard of the code.
Well, I'm not saying a particular point of view at the moment. I'm asking, I see a situation that's very contradictory, and I'm not sure what we intend. Again, suppose someone has a building, a non-conforming building, with some extra land available, they haven't quite filled up their property. And this could be anywhere in the Avenue Form District. We're not talking about just in the M4, just downtown. And they want to add a 25% addition with a new foundation. That would fall under the second line here, and they would be required to meet all of those standards, all those X's across.
Agreed.
If instead, someone had a 1-story building, wanted to add a second story to it, which would be a 100% increase in building area, that's not covered anywhere in the table, and they would not be required to meet any part of the form district standards. Is the way I read the table. Is that really what we intend?
I guess originally I thought the 1 and 2 story language on the third row was to cover all districts. Like we modified it to cover not just the B4 or the M4. So now we've changed it to in M4 frontage. So that eliminated the other being covered.
Yeah, that's true. If we didn't put that in there, that would be expanding, however, a rule that originally only applied in B3, would be expanding it throughout, all of Grand River and so forth, everything in the Avenue Form District. I'm not quite sure what the implications of that are.
Mhm. I would think that based on the discussion that we had with Planning Commission and Council when we changed this in the B3, based on the fact that the code changed it to being required to have a minimum of 4 stories. And we're doing that in the other districts, the M3, I believe. So where that is required, where we've got a minimum required height, I think that they would feel that this was also something they'd want to apply to those areas that we've required a minimum height in. So that
I thought I looked at that and we didn't. Yeah, the minimums in the others, the M3, the minimum is only 2 stories. So
okay,
it doesn't really apply. If they had a 1-story building and wanted another story, they would immediately meet the minimum.
right. That makes sense.
So I don't know, maybe I'd have to think about it. Maybe what you're saying would solve the issue I'm talking about if we did not say in M4 frontage.
Yeah, because then it just says up to 3 stories, and then we still are requiring them to use the form standards and architectural materials.
The one slight conflict I see there is that if we say up to a total of no more than 3 stories, which does make sense for M4, that would sort of be implying that they could go to 3 stories in M3 without meeting the requirements, which we really wouldn't want them to do.
But then it says, and the maximum height allowed within the regulating plan is not exceeded. So as long as that's the case?
No, because that doesn't really help with the minimum. Yes, I left out that phrase in my rewording because I thought it was quite clear that you cannot exceed the maximum height. That it was kind of redundant to say that in that line. So that would be the case in all districts. I don't know. I guess the problem is we're trying to do 2 things with this line now. Originally when this was a rule in B3, its only purpose was to allow a type of increase that would not otherwise have been allowed. That if they would not have been allowed to build something that was less than the minimum. But now we're trying to do 2 things. We're trying to allow that, and at the same time, we're trying to specify what parts of the form-based standards they have to meet. And I think that's what's causing this problem here. I don't know, maybe I have to think about this a little bit longer, or maybe we all do, to see what the right solution is.
It sounds, just so on that note, Chris, that the concern is that if it's a minor, no, actually, if it's a major, if there's an expansion of the building area more than, like you said, if it's a 1-story building and it's built to 2 stories, which is actually probably easily doable if you're talking about light wood construction and a sort of typical concrete foundation. In addition, generally that would hold an additional story pretty easily. That there would be no, because there's no additional foundation required, it could just be done as it could be done right now. There would be no attempt to try to, again, move the building forward closer to the required building line or establish particular, the dooryard and the private open space and so on.
Or even the elements like window shape and size,
Right.
and the architectural materials,
Sure.
and so forth. The public realm standards, none of that would apply.
Right.
I don't know, maybe we're okay with that. But it seems a little bit inconsistent.
Maybe you're right that it does require some additional thought. I'm also, maybe this could be something that gets flagged for when this gets pushed out to the community. I know that Brian Hagan he might be on right now. He says he sometimes lurks. Not officially, he's not sort of on our list here, but I'd be interested in hearing what people like him have to say about, he and his associates have to say about this particular concern. And because ultimately this is going to have to pass muster with the community as well.
Right.
All right. Well, I guess I'm ready to leave that one for a
That's
little
fine.
while.
And
Let's flag that though for
Dave and I can take a look at that too and make some recommendations. So we're not using up all of our time trying to brainstorm right now.
Yeah.
We know what the issue is and we can talk about it.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I agree, we do need to put something in there because I don't know that that's the intent. We want people to be able to, on non-conforming buildings, add on if they can meet these requirements. But at the same time, we want to make them bring it to conformance as much as feasibly possible.
Yeah, Dave, go ahead. And then I've got a comment too. Go ahead.
So sounds like, there are kind of two scenarios. You're either going adding up, adding on top of an existing building, or creating a lateral increase.
Yes.
If you're going up, I'm not sure you want to comply with, have a stacked building with two different design. I'm not sure you would want it to comply with the current standards. I think you want a continuation, something that fits the building. If you're going laterally, I think there's a little bit more of a natural break to make it look like a separate building, that kind of thing. You see that all the time with old buildings being merged and new building, new additions looking different and that kind of thing. But I see that as kind of the breaking point for me from an aesthetic perspective.
For me, it always comes back to, I actually found we have to do, as architects, we have to do 12 credits of, actually 18 if we're members of the AIA, of continued learning, continued education every year. And I found a course on form-based codes that I read, and repeatedly throughout the text, the author kept coming back to that the ultimate, intention of the form-based code is to shape the public space. That the sort of the architectural and the materials and even the uses are secondary to using the building form to shape the public space. And so this doesn't do that, right? So Chris, what you're saying is building on top of a building that's not at the required building line wouldn't achieve that goal. And I'm not saying we tweak it down to this particular level of detail, but it seems to me that if sort of just adding a street wall or a sort of a fence or something at the street line would help to establish that public space better in a building that we're talking about here, that you build an additional story and then hold the line with something that's a little bit stronger than just a sort of an open yard would make a significant difference in, again, trying to establish that all important public realm with whatever you're building. I'm not saying that therefore we should put an asterisk in because the street wall is under placement. That starts to get down into some pretty specific details that we don't want to try to cover on this table. But if part of the challenge of coming up with a solution here somehow addresses that fundamental intention to comfortably shape the public space, that I think that would get us closer to what we're aiming at.
Sounds good.
I think we're right to leave it for now, though.
Right.
And let me ask one other thing related to this. I guess I'll just ask it more to be thought about, and that is, why in the first two lines do we specify that an additional foundation is required? Why not leave that off? And when would it come in? In what way would you expand a building by 30% of its area without an additional foundation, other than by going up?
I think that's exactly,
Differentiating.
this is trying to indicate that it's going to be an expansion of the footprint as opposed to just the floor area. Yes?
I guess, unless I'm not quite sure the definition of a foundation here. I mean, if you added something on with a slab, which you wouldn't usually see in commercial, unless it was just a one-story thing, is that a foundation or not? A slab with some footings around it?
No.
It'll have a foundation, yeah.
How thick is the slab?
Okay, so it would be.
Oh, totally floating building.
Yeah, see?
Hey, Chris,
So,
did you lay something on your computer, on your
Yeah.
laptop? Your
Quiet.
volume dropped dramatically. I don't know if you've laid something on your microphone on your computer.
no, what was the question?
We can hardly hear you.
Yeah, your volume has dropped dramatically, and I don't know if you've laid something on your microphone on your
Oh, my
laptop.
microphone's totally freestanding up here.
Huh, okay, well, we can hear you well enough at least. So.
Really? Maybe I need to try to sit closer, or nothing visibly changed here at all.
I got the same.
Okay.
All right. So I'm still wondering, do we really need that that phrase "with additional foundation required" there? Because I think that would solve the problem. But anyway, I guess it's something to think about. Again, I'm not sure we should continue on this right now. So if we're going to continue, below that table, footnote number 1, I'd like to, it says building addition at or below. I think we should change addition to expansion, because the table up above refers to it as an expansion. Then, does that make sense?
Yes.
And actually the word addition occurs 2 more times in that note. It's 3 times altogether.
Got it.
Okay, and then my next comment, Dave already addressed this just a few minutes ago. The footnote number 1 is on the heading. It's expansion of building floor area, footnote 1 up there. And then we have 3 lines below that heading that we've just been talking about. Well, if you read footnote number 1, it's telling what kinds, or well, it's differentiating between the new construction and the old building as to what has to meet the code. It makes sense for the first 2 rows, but for the 3rd row, and this is what David was talking about, when stories are added, then if you were to retrofit the question is, if you add stories, do the original stories have to meet the code, or just the newly added stories? If you're required to retrofit the existing portion of the building, the first story, it could get really significant construction, taking out windows and all sorts of stuff. But if you require only the new stories to meet the form-based code, then you could have an unusual looking building where the top doesn't really match the existing one. So in reading the table and the footnote, I can't tell what it's trying to say about new stories. It essentially says, it says if you're adding something below 20%, the new addition expansion must comply and the existing building does not have to change. If you're going above 20%, which if you're adding a floor, that would be 100% or close, then it says the existing building must meet the code. Which means this would probably never, ever happen. I mean, it would force you to move the, match the required building line and just all sorts of things.
And that goes against what we have shown in the table for that M4 frontage.
Yes, that's right.
And why do we need that if we're showing the different standards across and what applies? Why do we need footnote 1?
Well, we were trying to reduce the amount of work they had to do to come into compliance for, in particular, for small additions. It's really an exception, primarily applying to the first line when you're doing a minor addition.
Right.
So what is your recommendation?
I'm not sure. I mean, if you look at the third line, what it's saying is that in that situation, the elements and the architectural materials, that's where the two X's are, have to be compliant. So it's not actually saying you would have to change the required building line in that case. That would be under placement. But it is saying all of your windows and doors would have to comply, all of your materials. There's probably other things under elements.
Could you start note number 1 with the exception of, I don't know how you say it exactly, vertical building additions, and then continue the rest of that statement. So you're basically saying if you're only going up with the building, then you know, note number 1, I guess, wouldn't apply to situations where you're only going vertical with the building. So you carve out, you know, vertical building additions that they don't have to comply with, you know, if they're over 20%. Is that?
So we would be exempting them completely from the form standards. Is that what you're saying? Or
I'm going to offer maybe a broader look at this. I'm thinking what you're saying, David, makes sense to me. I'm actually wondering sort of if when this gets put into motion, how much of the first several years of reviews are actually going to be people asking for variances, which I'm comfortable with, right? That we're going to see that there are places like this that we did our best to anticipate the different nuances of the code, but just, you know, couldn't quite sort everything out. And that I'm looking down several pages to the, you know, relief from unlisted standards and a request for relief from a required form standard other than those listed above. And there's 5 of them. shall be made through the variance procedures set forth in Article 2, Division 2, Article 2, Division 2 of Chapter 50. So that's the Zoning Board of Appeals, I presume. That, you know, sort of, I'm not saying give up on this, but that, you know, at some point, I think that's the reality, is that we're just not going to be able to anticipate some of the impact of this. Like you're saying, David, I could see a way that if it were done carefully, that you might be able to meet the elements standard on the upper level and not meet it on the lower level, on the main level, whatever the lower levels. But there might be a point where it just sort of somebody just says, this just isn't working, right? And that, I think actually one of the standards, one of the 5 variances, it says the sort of the design of the building shall be in keeping with the architectural character of downtown East Lansing. That's one of the listed standards. That's one of those things where, as I'm reading it or as I'm thinking about it, yeah, that sort of the planning commission can say, you know what, doing that in this case isn't going to work. That sort of forcing people to do I say windows that are, you know, small and vertically oriented or whatever, isn't in keeping with either the downtown or with the building in particular. So again, I don't want to just sort of say, well, let's just presume that it's gonna, that's the Zoning Board of Appeals problem now. But that's the reality, is that we're going to see, I think, a fair number of things because we did our best to anticipate it and just couldn't hit them all.
I think another part of it, at least for me, is I have a heck of a hard time figuring out what kinds of projects like this might come in.
Yeah.
Are there, you know, how many of them will there really be? There could be relatively few of expansions or new floor additions, and trying to write the rules right now without seeing any of the specific cases is incredibly difficult.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Part of the reason for the form-based standards and for ways of dealing with non-conforming buildings is that we would prefer in many cases to have things redeveloped.
Yes.
And in that sense, you want to make it at least a little bit challenging for them to make modifications. You want to push them more towards redevelopment rather than continuing to use out-of-date buildings. But I don't know what we want to do about this. If we, I guess we need to come up with something we think we can live with. And
I think that's exactly it, Chris, is that we sort of figure what we anticipate what the real issue is. And I think that the intention here is that, you know, that a small addition, it's got sort of a fewer boxes that it needs to check, right? Or maybe none, in fact. But that for the larger, more substantial work, that it's going to be expected that it's going to be brought more into compliance. In fact, in some cases, in full compliance. And we do our best to, you know, you think about the sort of the character of the different buildings as you move from M1 to M1 to M4. You know, not to mention the sort of going into residential, the residential zone. You know, you're talking about something from as big as the Landmark building, for instance, all the way down to the sort of 1-story buildings that are sort of scattered around my neighborhood and in Oakwood and so on. So it's not, you know, as we know, it's not an easy task, but we sort of try to anticipate the best we can. Don't get frustrated.
No, I don't know where this leaves us.
I know.
I can look at it some more, but every time I look at it, I just have questions about how we should be handling it.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to move on?
Sure. And like I said, Dave and I can take a look at it too and make some recommendations.
All right. I have some smaller ones now. If you move to the next, to page 6, right near the top, well, it starts with item C, and then 202 appears next. 202 should not be indented. It is on my copy.
Thank you.
It should be out at the left margin like the other numbers are. In going down just a little bit, in 202A, 4A, there's some language awkwardness, I think. It starts out concept site plan, comma, is a scaled plan. I would take out the word is there. And that will leave the comma delimited phrase as an explanation of what a concept site plan is. So it was a concept site plan, a scaled plan illustrating existing site features such as, et cetera, et cetera. And then after that comma, it then says, and provides, change provides to providing. And providing more detail on the areas of the site proposed to be changed. So at that point, the first sentence won't actually be a complete sentence. Instead is an item of what you are required to provide, but that is consistent with the other items in that list. If you look at the list number 4, A, B, C, D, and E, B, C, D, and E are all just items you have to provide. They're not a sentence telling you more about it. I don't know if that's okay with everybody, but
Looks good.
Yeah, that works.
Don't you have the same issue then with the lowercase d with that comma or not?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. I think I have that. Yes, I have. That's coming up in my changes. Yes.
Oh, okay.
But still on A, one more I'd like to see, I'm suggesting, I guess this is a question for staff because you deal with these, but towards the end of A, actually the second sentence in it, the level of information required shall be sufficient to ensure the modification complies with this and other applicable city codes. I would suggest that it say, ensure the modification generally complies with this and other applicable city codes. Because I think what they're providing is a concept at this point. And I think you're trying to make sure they're on the right track, sort of. I'm not sure if you really are confirming that it completely complies with the code at that point.
No.
That's fair.
So it would just say, ensure the modification generally complies, or some other word if you think it would.
Yeah.
And then in D, I would remove is, which we already did.
Another minor one looks like you should probably take on lowercase b, take the away and just start with the name and address, because you don't start the other A, B, C, D, E's with an article like that. So it would be more consistent to just say name and address.
Yep. Okay, then under B1, and now I can't quite read my own note. I wanted to add the word other. I think perhaps it should say site plan and administrative reviews and other approvals shall be required for the activities or uses listed in table 202.
Did I miss something? Didn't we take away and administrative previously?
Okay, yeah, all right. That's the document I don't have, so I'm looking at the previous one. So right now, you're saying it says site, what does it say?
Site plan reviews and approvals, right?
Right.
Site plan reviews and other approvals shall be required.
Well, that would be if we added what I said, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, I'm not quite so sure it needs it. If administrative is out of there, what does anyone else think?
I think we need to take the other back out.
I do too.
So site plan reviews and approvals.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm okay with that. In B2, oops, wait a minute. Well, I've got a note on something that does not appear there. Maybe, oh, maybe it's B3. Yes, okay, I'm sorry, B3. Approvals shall be obtained from the Planning Commission, City Council, or administration, depending upon the nature. What does administration mean there? We don't use that word anywhere else in this document. I was thinking that it meant, it should say approvals shall be obtained from the Planning Commission, City Council, or planning and zoning official, perhaps.
On page 7, we have administrative review as a column.
But we don't use the word administration.
Well, isn't that the same thing?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think the administrative review is conducted by our planning and zoning official.
Yeah, that's what I think this is referring to.
Okay, but it's not clear to me anyway. We never, anywhere else in the city, we don't refer to administration as something that's parallel to city council or planning commission.
I think that's fair to change that to an official, like a position in that sense.
Right, because it's specifically saying the approval shall be obtained from, and I'm pretty sure that the administrative approval comes from our planning and zoning official or director or.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what are you suggesting it be changed to, Chris?
Planning and zoning official, but
Oh.
if David has a different title or.
Yeah, we can get the right one in there. We can take a nod to the other parts of the zoning ordinance and see what it refers to, use the same term.
Okay. Further in B3, I think it's the third sentence. It starts out where the ordinance allows the city to grant modifications to a specific requirement. The approval authority shall be. And that seems somewhat ambiguous to me. What makes more sense to me is if it said where an application is requesting modifications to a specific requirement, the approval authority shall be the body, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know, does anyone else see that as an improvement, or are you okay with it as it is?
Because what you're saying is that because the ordinance always allows the city to grant modifications, but if the application isn't calling for it, then. Right, then what's
Yes.
Sure. Sure.
Why
So-
is it necessary to have this,
Ah.
these two sentences
More.
in this?
I sort of agree with that. That same question occurred to me.
It seems like an odd placement to say, oh, by the way, you can get waivers and whatever. It just seems kind of,
You're talking about the third and fourth sentences, both of them,
Yes.
is that right?
Yep.
I don't know, perhaps it's seen to contribute a little bit to the explanation of the site plan review, which is what B is all about. It's trying to say that that would be, well, I guess that would really follow after the site plan review, wouldn't it?
It would.
Do we need to move it or just eliminate it?
Or maybe, no, I don't know, maybe it is part of the site plan review. Certainly if it's coming before the planning commission and then council, that is part of the site plan review, and that is when those would be granted. But I think Dave's point to start with was, why do we have to say it?
I think it's just kind of unnecessary. It's just my opinion. I don't think it hurts anything by being there, but it just seems kind of like a lot of extra reading.
You could almost say that about the first two sentences as well, although I do think they are somewhat helpful to have them repeated here, even though you could figure them out from elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think with it being a new code, and I think keeping it all together with your change would be beneficial, even though, yeah, we don't really need it. It's already stated.
That suits me.
Chris, could you repeat the first part of that sentence that you're changing for me, please?
Yeah. The third sentence, it would start with where an application is requesting, or maybe we don't need is, maybe you could say where an application requests modifications. And then it would continue with the rest of the sentence.
Very good.
Or I suppose it, the one before it says where also, right? Yeah. I was thinking it could say when instead of where, but keep it consistent with the second sentence, I guess.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, let's see, on the next page, number 6, you deleted that completely, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Save some changes.
that gets at exactly what I was questioning about it. I'll skip that. Go back to page 6, number 5, the very last line. That's still there, correct? The Planning Commission retains the option.
No, that is removed.
Okay, all right. That takes care of that one. Okay, page 7, table 202. What does it look like right now? I show it, there's a bunch of X's, of course, two lines say administration may refer to planning commission for consideration.
Yep.
And actually there is that word again, administration. But that wasn't my question. So those are still there? Is that
Yeah.
right? They still
Yeah.
have the may refer. Is it really necessary for us to say that there? And my point is, if you look at the first line and the fourth line, those both end with planning commission review. They don't have an X for city council review. And yet we don't say that the planning commission may refer them to council. Does that mean the planning commission cannot do that?
David? Yeah.
So I think we either need to add that in there to be consistent, or
I thought we had that in there and we removed it.
Well, David's making exactly the point that I was raising. It's the inconsistency that.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but my point is we had that language in there and for some reason we removed it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. If we removed it, then shouldn't we also remove the two that are still there under the planning commission?
Right, but I don't know, I can't remember what the conversation is now. It was such a long time ago, but we were talking about we don't want, under those circumstances, we don't want to have the planning commission to have the ability to send it to council because we want this to be streamlined. But Dave felt that it was very important that administration had that ability to refer to planning commission because of the vulnerability that staff has.
Is this
But
possibly? Sorry.
my understanding was you didn't want planning commission to have the ability to refer the things that they have.
I remember that now too.
I see this as a way for staff to say, look, chapter and verse, our answer is no. But if we move it up a step to the planning commission, you might find that they have less concern with it. That basically gives the staff a relief valve for them to effectively act as the bad guy, say, nope, that doesn't meet chapter and verse. But instead of saying, and you're done, they could say, but the planning commission might have a different take on this, and let's move it up a step and give you an opportunity to make your case to the public body. Whereas, as you say, in the other two cases, if the intention is to streamline the process and they meet, they check all the boxes, there's no reason for council to see something that's relatively straightforward as it's defined here.
Okay. I saw it slightly differently. I saw it more as staff might be worried about an approval of theirs more so than a denial. They might be worried about approving something that was not approved by the community as judged by the planning commission or the council.
Yeah, I think
it's almost the same thing, because if we're afraid to approve something, we'd have to deny it. So instead of denying it, we're going to ship it off to the planning commission.
Okay.
If we're concerned about approving something, we're probably going to deny it, but let's send it to planning commission to see what they say.
Yeah, but being on the planning commission, I might have that same feeling about projects coming before us, thinking, well, do we really want to approve this if it's something council might seriously object to? So it can apply in both cases. I understand the argument that you try to make it so it is always streamlined, doesn't get pushed through additional approvals that shouldn't be needed.
Right. And you have to understand when it's administrative, there's no public participation process, where when there's planning commission, when it stops at planning commission, at least there's some public participation process. And I know we talked about that if we feel that the application really meets all the requirements, we also know that it's going to be publicly, controversial, or that it could be, that at least needs to be put in a public forum for those discussions to be had.
Yeah, you're right. That is a significant difference. So, all right. I guess it looks inconsistent, but with that discussion, I guess it makes sense. Okay, looking under the site plan review, I'm trying to find this. The line about parking, a change in use that expands the parking lot area by more than 10% from the approved site plan. And my question is, suppose someone wanted to change a use that expanded the parking lot area by 8%, let's say. This seems to imply that that could be done without any administrative approval at all.
Well, there's an X in the administrative review column.
But that's if you're expanding more than 10%. I'm saying, suppose you have to expand it, but by a smaller amount.
It's a good point.
Is that really what we want?
Should we say 10% or less?
Well, should it just say that it expands the parking lot area?
Is there some sort of, this is your internal processes, I'm wondering here, is there some sort of process by which someone comes in and says, for instance, I want to expand the parking lot by 8%, that basically that's somebody at the front desk checks it off and it's on its way, as opposed to going onto one of your desks or to.
No, it always comes to us.
Yeah. So there's going to be some sort of, even if it's minor, there's going to be some sort of administrative review.
So that does make more sense, just to say.
That's a good point. Like, so if we were sitting here, any change to any paving is going to come across our desk.
Yeah.
So if it's less than 10% or 10% or less, we could evaluate it, and if it works, we could issue the paving permit. Happy day.
Right.
That's still an administrative approval.
If it's 11%, then I think we put them through a formal administrative review process separate from. That's what that would do. And if it was to the extent that, let's see, wait a minute. Yeah. If it's to the extent that it's such a major change, we could say, well, we're uncomfortable with this, and if it's 50% or whatever, it would make such a huge difference that we could refer it to the Planning Commission.
No, I think that makes sense. But I think we need to put 10% or less.
Well, then what would happen if it was 20%?
Right.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is we would make that determination as part of the administrative review process. If it was such a drastic change, then we would refer it to the Planning Commission if it didn't seem like it was.
So what do we need? That being said, Dave, how would we reword this?
Right, how do we cover that in the table here? And a further question actually is, you notice that line applies only if there's a change in use. If someone comes in and simply says, I want to expand my parking lot, that line does not apply to them. So it's not clear how that would be handled.
What's the concern? I mean, we would handle it just the way it's stated. If it's less than 10%, it would be handled by a paving permit. If it were more than 10%, we would do an administrative review like we normally do and apply the same standards.
So you're saying it doesn't need to appear in the table at all? You're saying there are circumstances not covered in the table, and that's okay with you?
Yeah, anything under 10%, we would handle through a paving permit.
They still have to have a paving permit for parking, period. And we review all paving permits.
Yeah,
So
regardless.
they wouldn't have to give us a full site plan and all of that. They have requirements for paving permits.
I'm looking back through the, this is the copy dated January 31st of this year, and we've since streamlined administrative review. Remember, used to have a concept plan and a full plan. And this 10% change in use, it expands the parking lot by more than 10% from the 10% from the approved plan was under the concept review, but not under the full plan. So that was sort of like that pre-plan or mini site plan review concept plan. And that sort of when compressing those two into just a simply titled administrative review, I think this is a vestige of that, trying to retain, remember, because Darcy had just said it would be a full site plan review. Well, that's not the concept plan. That's this, well, what they call here on again, back in January, full site plan review. So I think, as you just said, Chris, or David had said, or both of you sort of complimented one another or repeated one another, that maybe this needs to just be removed. Because it's the situation will get picked up regardless. It just doesn't need to be on this table.
I think it does.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think it just clarifies that anything higher than 10% doesn't just get a paving permit. It has to have a review of a site plan. And
in my mind, I had stricken I basically had taken, I'd already.
That's just my opinion.
Dave, you're fine. I had stricken the 10%. Basically, I had gone with Chris's idea of changing use that expands the parking lot area and be done with it. But no, I think you're right that the 10% threshold maybe needs to stay.
Could we go back to my question about the change in use? Because that still bothers me. They could come in with a 20% parking lot area with no change in use, and this table wouldn't require anything in particular of them.
That's a good point.
Yeah, why doesn't it just say expansion of the parking lot area?
I think that's fair.
That's definitely a good change. Okay.
Go down two more lines to the one that says adjacent to single family district. We have a similar description. Let me see if I can find it, because I didn't. Under neighborhood manners, there's a similar situation where that applies, and it is worded differently. And I thought maybe what it says specifically for mixed use frontages sharing a common lot line with a single family residential zoning district outside the Avenue Form District. So it is much more specific about the situation, but I think maybe that is the situation we're trying to talk about in this table. Is it not? And actually, let me ask a follow-up question. Would any of the new form districts be considered single-family districts? Our new R2, R3, R4, R5, are they?
Mm-hmm. R2, isn't it?
That would be considered single-family because it can have detached cottages on lots by themselves.
Right.
So would that trigger this requirement in the table? If somebody was building something adjacent to an R5, would that trigger it? Unlike neighborhood manners, which is only triggered next to an existing single family, R1 and R2 basically in our code.
Basically, what it's saying is any development that is proposed next to a single family district, which would be the R2, would have to get council approval. Basically, that is one of the situations that rises to a public participation level that most people are concerned of having a new multiple family building or a new commercial building, anything of that nature.
Right, but my question is, I don't know exactly what it means by single family district. When you read what it says in neighborhood manners, it's very, very specific and you can understand it. And I don't know what it means here. So would it apply if, suppose someone was building in R3, the new R3 in the Avenue District, and it was adjacent to an R2. Do we want this type of approval to apply there? Even though we've zoned those next to each other, knowing that they're going to coexist there?
Good point, but
It was specifically put into neighborhood manners to, you might say, protect our legacy single family properties from impingement by the new form-based district. And I can't tell if that's what this line in this table is supposed to do also.
And actually under neighborhood manners, is it not specifically, it's the mixed use? It's the M?
Yes, yes, exactly.
So it's
Right,
not,
whereas
it's actually the R, the mixed or the form, the avenue form R frontages that the neighborhood manners don't apply.
That's right.
and really it should say adjacent to single family structures or districts, something of that. Existing has to be in there because there's going to be situations where we may have rezoned them to a multiple family district, but it still is a single family use.
I don't know. Do you really want to worry about those? If we've already rezoned them, to me, the district is what's more important than what's on the ground there.
Okay.
I'm not sure everyone would agree, but
Yes, especially for the purpose of this ending up in front of council. I mean, that's where this line ends up.
I can see residents that are living in, even though we've upzoned them, there's going to be a small handful of actual residents.
Well, can we just use the same language and say adjacent to a single family residential zoning district outside of the Avenue Form District?
that was my question. Does that make sense for what we're trying to accomplish here or not?
Yeah, I think that's what was intended by that line.
So it will say now, single family districts outside.
Adjacent to a single family residential zoning district outside of the Avenue Form District.
How about outside the regulating plan?
I would like, Dan raised the question, the neighborhood manners only applies to the M districts. And I'm wondering if that's what we intend here also. I mean, if someone wants to build something in our new R4 district, and that happens to be next to single family, well, isn't that kind of what we expect already? It's not really a special case.
Right.
So are we going to use, I think I like outside of the regulating plan, because that makes it really clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fine.
All right.
But you also added something about it applying only to the M frontages or not?
No, I think we need to. That's a good
Well,
point.
we could start it with within any M district.
Or frontage, I think.
Excuse me. Yeah. It's so hard.
Yeah, it is.
Or something.
So within
Smith that out.
any M district, M frontage, adjacent to single family districts outside of the regulating plan. You catch that?
I think so.
All right.
Okay. Just below the table, item D, I would suggest change the word incentives to bonuses. Because it seems to me what the city council is approving is the bonus that they have requested. In fact, if you look at item number 1, it immediately says the city may grant bonuses. It's kind of a small distinction, but are there any other opinions on that one? Or?
I think that's great.
How is this referred to in other parts of our code? Is it referred to as incentives?
We ended up putting the title of that bonus / incentives, or maybe you're switching it around. Let me see.
We use both words, but they have
Right.
different meanings. We're
Right.
offering incentives, but what we grant are the bonus.
Right.
It would be nice to reflect the language that's used elsewhere. I mean, at least keep it somewhat similar.
And I think this would. I think this is. I think Chris is right, because this language, incentives requiring city council approval, was added before we went back and realized we talk about incentives and we talk about bonuses separately. So we have it. The title says bonus / incentives, and this is speaking of bonuses.
Bonus.
And you can actually see the difference if you read through items 1 and 2. Notice that item number 2, applicants shall indicate their intent to utilize incentives during the pre-application meeting. And that's correct. They are using the incentive, not the bonus. They're using the incentive to request a bonus of some kind.
Got it. That makes sense to me now.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Then moving on to item E. The word modification. I don't think that's really the best word here. My suggestion would be to use exceptions, because especially if you read number 1, it says modifications to the architectural standards of Part 6 may be approved by the Planning Commission. To me, that seems to imply modifications to the code itself, where we would go in and make a permanent change in it.
No, I think that's a good change.
So it would say exceptions to the architectural standards may be approved. And I guess I would change the title as well, the E itself, to say exception, or probably exceptions.
Got it.
And then the second sentence, I would change it to say a request for an exception shall require an application that includes, et cetera, et cetera. So it would just change the first few words to say a request for an exception. Or I suppose it could say an application. Well, we use application later. I suppose it could be shortened to actually say an application for an exception shall require a site plan and a facade elevation, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make any more sense?
Yep.
I think that's much clearer.
It is.
Yeah. Oops. Got it.
All right, page 8. Oh, I finally getting to the end of this. Yeah, there's a language problem in the middle of this. The first part is okay. It says ground floor window. I'm sorry, did I say it's E?
No,
Item E on page 8. Ground floor windows shall be provided along the front sidewalk to maintain the pedestrian orientation of the streetscape. Pedestrian orientation should not have a hyphen in it, I don't think. But then it continues, and upper story windows and shall not be incompatible. So that's not quite right. And what I was going to suggest, it's supposed to say, the first part up through streetscape makes sense. That's talking about the ground floor windows, the pedestrian orientation. And then perhaps the second is supposed to say, and upper story windows shall be compatible with the rhythm and proportion of windows on other buildings along the block. As it is, it has an extra and in there, and it has a double negative that isn't real good.
how about making it 2 sentences
There we go.
and taking out that and making it the way you suggested, upper story windows shall be compatible with.
Yeah,
Just make it 2 separate sentences.
yeah, that sounds good to me.
Absolutely.
And that is the end of my list.
Oh, well done.
All right. Got that cleaned up.
Okay, I think that brings us through to the end, except for uses.
What I would recommend, because of the time, I'd really like to go over the schedule.
Sure.
If we can start fresh with the uses next time, and
Yeah,
that will give Dave and I an opportunity to look at it and add some more stuff to it.
I was just summarizing our position, Darcy. I agree with you. So we'll come back to uses at our next meeting, which is currently scheduled for, well, we it's not currently scheduled.
Yeah, we have no next meeting on
Run out.
the schedule.
Therefore, the schedule will be helpful.
There we go. So last page, we're looking at the third week of October, and that's the meeting that we're currently in. We're looking to bring this before the commission in 2 weeks.
We were. I think we've got at least one more meeting to go, just to wrap things up. We also wanted to run by you and get your recommendation. Because of COVID and our current situation, it's going to be really tricky to come up with a plan for the public participation process. And Dave and I discussed this and thought it might be beneficial to have a separate committee from the Planning Commission that is kind of brainstorming how we handle that and come up with some ideas how we go out to the community with this plan under the current situation. And we wanted to run that by you and see what you think.
Is it your concern that the expectation is that we're probably going to get a fair amount of participation, attendance, input, and that trying to do that over Zoom might prove a bit unwieldy?
Yeah, it might. And we want to have more than just one method of participation. You know, I don't know, should we specifically have a list of developers that we send it out to for comment? I mean, what are the things that would be beneficial to make sure that this is going to be a workable plan before we actually put it in ordinance form?
So the committee would be charged with determining what the best method of distributing this information is, and then what would be the best method to collect input once the information's been distributed.
Exactly.
And collection, I guess. Okay. How does that sound with this group?
I have a feeling that that's something that should probably be initially discussed at the Planning Commission, because I think everybody will have some thoughts on that. I have no issue with another committee, but I think everybody's going to want to chime in on that, at least get thinking about it.
Would it be okay for a committee to start coming up with some ideas and then presenting that to the Planning Commission for more input? So we're not just starting at a Planning Commission kind of free for all?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, I'm not sure that's necessary step. I'm not sure if it helps or not. I see your point a little bit about a free for all, but again, as Cindy said, I think the others might be interested or have opinions to contribute on it. So I think we could start either place.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to us. We just want to get your input on that before and we need to do that sooner than later because it's going to take some time to organize that. We want to start doing that during the time that we're taking this to the Planning Commission. So
with the expectation is that if there's a committee or the decisions or the recommendations made by the Planning Commission would be in place by, according to today's schedule, the middle of April.
Right.
Roughly. Right. Okay.
Do we throw it on our agenda for next week?
I think that'd be fine. At the very least, make that.
How do we move forward with outreach? Just throw out just some ideas about forming a committee,
New business.
Yeah.
Great.
Maybe that comes with a note from one of the two of us regarding what that. So just to get people thinking about it. Right, just to clarify,
Yeah,
even if it doesn't lead to. Go ahead, Darcy.
Staff can put together a memo and have you tweak it if you'd like, Dan.
No, I'm fine with that. I'm just thinking that way it's not just an item on the agenda. It's an item on the agenda with some potential background so that people can start to think of, even if we don't reach absolute conclusions, people can start thinking about how that might be implemented.
Great.
Could it be part of our committee report?
There you go. All right. Did you want other, so you want to plan another
Yes,
meeting and then the planning commission only meets once in November, correct?
that's correct.
That's correct.
And that's
And-
currently scheduled, oh, that's to be the 9th to the 13th, the week of the 9th to the 13th. That's the second
Correct.
Wednesday.
No, the 18th of November and the 9th.
Oh,
of
'cause
December.
Is that right?
Yes, because of Veterans Day on the 11th.
Thanks.
Oh,
Thanks,
that's
Rebecca. I was
right.
trying to think about, no, the election's the week before and council shouldn't, okay. Thank
That's
you.
right.
Thanks, Rebecca. All right, so it's the, currently our next meeting is scheduled for the box in between the two green boxes.
But we have one October 28th. And then regular
That's-
meetings with the planning commission and then
Yep.
November 18th.
Yeah, sorry, these are just to indicate work sessions. Well, is there any reason why this committee couldn't meet on the just replace the work session, the planning commission work session on the 2nd and the 6th?
That would be a good idea. If that's
Then the
good for
question is,
everyone.
do you want to have a planning commission meeting, a work session the next week or not, working around Veterans Day? Or not?
I think we start the first planning commission work session on the December 1st through 4th.
That's fine.
That way we can, like I said, we're putting together a memo that generally goes through all of the changes that were made that weren't just grammatical or clarifications.
Sure.
And then we have time to make any changes that we're doing now.
Yeah, actually, I'm sort of looking at this now, and presumably it was just an oversight, Darcy, but if the regular meetings could be reintroduced, just so I just added some notes for myself, but just so to get everybody thinking that, we're going to be looking at either regular meetings or work sessions throughout the
So
end of
add
the year.
those to it.
Yeah, please. Thanks.
Yes.
Although this table was trying to show the meetings where the form-based code would be discussed.
But
Right.
I can shadow it in and just so
Oh,
people,
All right,
Yeah,
my bad. That
Because
makes
there-
sense.
because there is one planning commission regular meeting on this
I
schedule
see, yeah.
in December.
Okay, maybe I guess I misunderstood what that meant. So I guess in some ways it was just sort of getting a bigger view that, just to let.
Right, I agree. It would help
know
to see them. It would help to see them on the calendar.
if I just put it in black, I think just put without the color.
Yes.
Oh, there
I
you go.
think that'll
Yeah.
help.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you. And then if the intention then is that we'll meet 3 times with the planning commission, either in work sessions or regular meetings, that'll push us into the first or second week of January for the final planning commission input meeting. All right.
And especially, there's a good chance that we'll not have a lot of items or not have an item, so we can go
Sure.
from one meeting to the other.
Right. We could just say tentative. The third one will be tentative. All right.
Good?
Did you need anything else, Darcy?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, terrific. All right, let me bring it back up to the top here. Is there anybody, Rebecca, I'm looking at I'm not seeing that there's any attendees that
I
might want
don't
to
see
make
that there are any attendees either.
public comment. Would you like to make any public comment?
No, thank you.
Okay. With that said, then I will call us adjourned if there's no other business.
Well,
Thank you, everyone.
Oh,
yeah, be-
maybe there is.
yeah,
Sorry.
just before I'm off, is my microphone still low?
It's
been that
better
way.
now.
It's better now.
Really?
Yeah,
Not much, but better than it was. We could
Turn
hardly
mine up
hear
a
you
bit.
for a while there.
I will check my equipment here after I get off here and see if I can see any setting that's wrong, but
it definitely did drop off, at the beginning of the meeting. There was a marked, I thought that I muted you.
I turned mine up thinking I did something. Yeah.
oh, all right, thanks.
All right, you bet. And,
Thank you.
We are adjourned at 10:57.
Thank you.
Be
Thanks,
safe,
everyone.
everybody.
All right. see ya.
Bye-bye.